Creating something like this in SketchUp is surprisingly easy if you know a couple little tricks and if you understand how materials are treated in SketchUp. Now, to create this, I'm also going to be using some Photoshop files that were inserted or will be inserted into the SketchUp model that contain smart objects that are in fact Illustrator files, keeping the true scalable vector graphics. And I'll do a little bit of rendering with Shaderlight. You can take this model into really any rendering application that accepts or works with SketchUp files, and there are a lot of them. Even if you don't have a rendering application handy, I've noticed if you turn off the axes and the edges, this alone is a fairly convincing little communication tool, especially for parts that move and are imperfect like paper, like a trifold. So let's jump right into it. Let's get started. And I used, in this example, a template that I found by Googling trifold AI template, AI meaning Adobe Illustrator. And somewhere on the first page, you should see a website, designbump.com. And if you click on that, there is this template. And I like it because it's somewhat composed and designed. It doesn't just look like this with bleed marks and trim lines and whatnot. A little bit nicer to work with. You do need to tweet or Facebook post in order to download this. But if you want to follow along using the same graphics, that is where I got the file. Also, this is a little bit more of an advanced walkthrough. If you've watched my other videos, I try to take my time explaining how and why the tools are being used. This one, I'm not going to spend so much time doing that for the sake of speed. And also, I'm assuming you know a little bit about Illustrator and Photoshop as well. So if you're comfortable with all of that, let's get started. I'm going to open up those files that I downloaded. Here they are. And the templates are set up really nice. You may get a warning like this saying your fonts are not available. For this example, that is okay. We don't need the exact correct fonts. And I've got this on the front and the back. So I'll just close those dialogues. What I do want though is my layers, especially for the inside, because I need to turn on my artwork, and I'll turn off these other ones. Now, when you are preparing this for print, you would want to use this type of environment because the color calibration is set in the mode, the color mode. It has all of the important guides and information that you need to set this up. For this example, all I'm interested in is the artwork. So I'm going to turn off the other layers, select this artwork, which is a combination of text and vector graphics. I don't think there's any images in here. There might be, but I don't see any. And I'm going to copy those. So I'll do an edit copy. From now on, I'll probably just use the shortcuts of Command V and Command C. In Photoshop, I'm going to make a new file, and I will set this to match the size of the virtual piece of paper I will be creating in SketchUp. So 11 by 8.5. 150 pixels is fine, and I'll set RGB color. Also, I'm going to stick with the Mac. Usually in these videos, I'll jump back and forth to show you the differences, the minor differences between the Mac and Windows environment. Hopefully you'll be able to make the mental connection if you're following along on a Windows machine. So this gives me my 8.5 by 11 inch image, and I will paste, being very sure to select Smart Object as the paste option. And it looks like it's off a tiny bit in the corner. That's all right. This is just a little visual exercise. So tiny imperfections will be perfectly okay. I'm on the trifold brochure outside, copy, tab over to my Photoshop document, paste this also as a smart object. Now, what have we got going on here? If I open up my layers, I can see I've got my layers as I've pasted them. They're smart objects. And at this point, I don't even really need these Illustrator files anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and close those and go back to Photoshop. Also, I should save this, shouldn't I? I'm going to save this to the desktop, and I'll just call it master.psd. Back in SketchUp, I'll start a new file, and I will import that image. So as long as I've got all supported image types, I can select that file, master.psd. I'm also specifying use as image. That is really important. Worth noting here is this is now embedded in the SketchUp file. It's not linking to that file. It's not linking like Adobe Illustrator commonly links raster images. This is a part of this file. It also converts it to a flat JPEG. So if I were to load up this in my material browser, which I'll do a little bit later, you would see I could go back to Photoshop, but it's a completely different file. Let me go back to Photoshop, turn off that visible layer, and resave this image. Not save as, just saving over that master.psd file. Back in SketchUp, I will now import and select that same image, snapping to the extent of the previously imported image. So this represents the front and the back that I need to tweak a little bit more. But before I do that, I will set the size. And SketchUp is kind of cool. You can use it as if you were drawing on a napkin. You don't need to be thinking about scale. But if you do know a certain size, for example, from this point to this point is in fact 11 inches, you can scale your entire model based off of that with the tape measure tool. So I will do that. Click once, click twice, type 11 inches, hit enter. It'll prompt me, do I want to resize? I do. I was very large, much larger than needed to be. So now this is scaled correctly. If I were to bring in some other models from the 3D warehouse and they were scaled correctly, everything would be scaled proportionate to one another. I need to position these a little bit better for this process. So what I'm going to do is move this one down. I consider that the back side. This is the front side because it contains the front panel. Then I'm going to move this one in. I will be going back to Photoshop and Illustrator in a few minutes, but I'll stick in SketchUp world for the time being. This bottom image, imported image now, it's still in its little container. With the move tool, if you hover over the sides, you'll get these little hatches that you can click on and rotate. And I want to flip that around because SketchUp projected images, which these are when they're first imported, means they will project into space. So if this projects straight up, it's going to hit the back side of that geometry. But the way these were imported, the way SketchUp treats it, it just applies the same image on the front and back faces. So I'm fixing that right now. I'm going to select these images, right click, and select explode. At this point, these are more traditional SketchUp geometries that are just edges and faces. Now with the paint bucket tool and the command tool, the command key rather, I can bring up the eyedropper. I'll sample that material and then release the modifier key. I can click to paint that material beneath that geometry, and that sure didn't work out like I was expecting, so let me try that again. Sample, paste. There we go. I'm not sure what I did wrong the first time, but that is what I am looking for. Now, triple click, hit delete. Probably not a bad idea to save this as well. I'll just put this on my desktop and call it trifold. Well, what's next? This is a representation of our unfolded trifold. Let me go back to Photoshop. And I'm going to double click on one of these smart objects. That will open up this file in Illustrator, which is really the cool thing about this whole thing, because I'm working in Illustrator, I'm working in Photoshop, I'm working in SketchUp, all really using the same graphics. And when you show this to someone, say a client, they don't really understand how this thing is going to be folded together and assembled and what it might look like on a table. And those things are important because you want this to be as realistically rendered digitally in order to make the best actual reality thing, whatever it is, whether it's a printed trifold or a house or whatever. So I just wanted to open up Illustrator to mention that. Back in SketchUp, with the select tool, I'm going to select this left edge. Grab the move tool, and I'm going to use the copy modifier key, which if you look in the lower left-hand corner, you should see it says option on a Mac. I can't remember what it is on Windows, Alt or something like that, but just check it out. Copy it over to here, and then if I type 3/ hit enter, it will create 3 copies. I could do 4/ and enter, but this is not a quad fold. This is a trifold. 3/ enter. Keep an eye on the lower right-hand corner to see the numeric input that I am feeding SketchUp. Okay, at this point I could start folding these with the rotate tool, start getting an idea of what it looks like, but that would be jumping ahead. So let me undo that. And, oh, that's interesting. All right. I want to make these components because I'm going to have multiple copies of this thing lying around. I want to make them components so when I edit one, they all change. Let's jump back to this one. Pretty easy to do. Double click on that geometry to select the face and the edges that define it. Right click, make component. I'll just say P1 for panel 1. And I forgot to do something. Right click, make component. You maybe forgot as well. You need to select replace selection with component if those geometries are shared with something else, which in this case it is. P1 once again, it'll ask me if I want to replace it. Yes, I do. P2, replace selection. Once again, right click, make component. P3, replace selection. So I've got these that are all their own component. In order to edit them, I need to double click. And if you see this dashed line and the rest of your model is grayed out, that means you are in edit mode. Click over here to zoom out. And now's a good time. Let me just make a copy of this guy up here. And let me talk briefly about the rotate tool. The rotate tool, as with most of the SketchUp tools, is deceptively simple. Most tools you can use with a click, release, click method. Click, release, click. That draws a rectangle. The push-pull tool. Click, release, click. You can also use what's called a click, drag, release. Click, drag, release. I advocate for the click, release, click mode more often than not, with the rotate tool being an exception. Also, with all of these tools, you can pre-select or you can active select, meaning let the tool do the selection for you. Well, in this situation, I'm going to pre-select those components, grab the rotate tool. Now I want to rotate along this edge, so I'm going to click and drag, not click release, click and drag, let go when I'm at this endpoint. That sets that rotation angle. Now I can click on that compass, click down here, and I've just rotated that 90 degrees. I'll be doing that a lot in this example. So I'll do it once more and explaining a little bit quicker, and then I'll probably just quit explaining it altogether. Select these faces, rotate, click and drag and release. That sets the point at which these selected items will rotate around. And now I can just kind of eye it. And maybe I want this to be a subtle fold. Select tool, I'll grab just that panel, rotate, get that edge, click, drag, release. Once again, sets the position, and I can fold this over. So I believe that's called a Z fold. And there's 3 different components. So if you're in a hurry, this might be good enough. You can maybe quit now and show this to your client and they would be happy. Let me talk a little bit about the material browser, which you can bring up with the paint bucket tool. Looks a little different on Mac and PC, but you should be able to connect the right dots here. If I want to edit any one of these, I can right click, select edit, and then there's this little icon here with the orange arrow. If I click that, it will jump into your image editor of choice. Make sure you set your image editor in your preferences. Navigate to your preferences. One of the first options will be to set the application for editing image files. All right, now I'm in Photoshop. Let me do a really quick adjustment to the hues because that's pretty easy. I can see some JPEG artifacting in there. That's all right. Hit OK. Hit save with my shortcut keys, Command S, and that will update automatically. There you go. It updated here. It updated every part where that is being used. I can either go back to Photoshop and undo, save, and it will update again, or I can just undo right within SketchUp, and that should also undo that change. Let me go back here. Keep in mind that this is a separate file than this one, the master Photoshop file that I started with, which I want to keep for reasons I will explain in a couple of minutes, but I can close that because it is no longer needed. This is not very realistic. Trifolds are not that perfect unless you've got some kind of crazy paper material that does not bend. But in reality, these get folded because they'll be in people's back pockets. They'll be stacked kind of at funny angles in the corner of your storage, etc. How do we add this minor imperfection? Well, there's a few ways to do it. Here is one. I'm going to do it on this first panel. So double click to edit. With the select tool, I'll grab that left edge and I'll make a copy just like I did before. Move tool, modifier key, which is option, click to start, click to place. This time I'm going to do /enter to make 4 copies. Now remember that little rotation trick I did with the different panels? Same process. Grab the move tool. I pre-selected that surface or face. Get my angle of rotation, and this time I'll just start it. Before I click to specify, notice it's also changing in the background there. I'll just get it started in the right direction and type 10, enter. Grab my select tool, and I'm drawing a right to left crossing window to make that selection. Rotate, start the rotation, type 10, hit enter. Repeat. Select, rotate, drag and release, 10. One more time. Rotate. Whoops, and I did that incorrectly. Command Z, undo. 10. Now I want to rotate this whole thing back. Oh, about like that. Well, what else? I've got these harsh folds in here. The trick is to really get the minimally effective amount of polygons so it looks curved but not segmented. Let me edit that again. Eraser tool. With the eraser tool, you can hold down a modifier key to either smooth or hide. Now that doesn't look very good. Notice there's kind of this weird, I see something here I do not like, and I know what happened. If I turn on my hidden geometry, I can see that SketchUp in that rotation operation made these unnecessary segments that I can just click on. Notice the dash is finer than the smooth dash. This dash here represents a hidden geometry that is smooth. That dash represents a hidden geometry that's not smooth, which is why it kind of had that weird little not quite right look. If it's really bad, I recommend finding this plugin called Cleanup. It's excellent. You can get it from the 3D warehouse, and it's really helpful. You can clean up all sorts of junk like that in your model with a couple of clicks. But let me turn off my hidden geometry and let's see how this looks. That's not so bad. It's maybe a bit curvy, but you know, we'll call it good. And look up here. It also edited on this one. So you know what? I'm going to change that just ever so slightly. That looks right. Although that sure looks swapped, doesn't it? Why do I feel like if that were to unfold. Oh no, that is correct. See, that's why you want to do this, because when you see things folded up, you start realizing what it looks like in reality versus what it looks like in Adobe Illustrator. Some of you might be thinking, oh, there's a quicker way to do that. Or some of you might be saying, there's got to be a quicker way to do that. Yes, the answer is yes to both. On this third panel, if you're in a hurry, you can do it this way. Grab that surface, push pull this up. Doesn't matter how high you want to go, because we'll be erasing most of it anyway. But because this texture is projected, and here's another visual hint that it is being projected. You can see how it stripes along the side. Because of that, you can take the arc tool, and I'll just draw a little arc down here. Now the arc tool, after you've drawn it, will accept a modifier. So I'm going to type 4S and hit enter. And that should give me a 4-sided arc. It's very subtle, but you can see it. Otherwise, the geometries might be a bit much. Now with the push-pull tool, let me deselect that surface, push-pull, look at this, nice. Quicker, not quite as accurate because it's actually distorted that image, but it's so subtle, no one's gonna notice. All right, that one looks good, and once again, it was edited or changed up here. Here now too, you can see how this middle piece would be folded. Imagine this is in your back pocket. And you know, that helps you understand how these pieces are going to be folded and what they might look like. So that middle panel won't go up, it'll go down. And if you're jumping ahead, you're gonna find out something here. Let me edit that one. Oh, I'll just pull this down. Whoops, nope. Look what happened. It got kind of screwy here. Let's undo that. I can tell you why. It has to do with geometries, and computational mathematics. All of these models contain a positive side and a negative side, or a front face and a back face. If you push-pull a front face, which you can see represented by this lighter color, backwards, it does some odd things. If you push it forward, it's an additive process. And I just activated my monochrome view setting in order to see that a little bit better. Well, how do you deal with it in this situation? Pretty easy. You push-pull it up as you did before. There's just one extra step. I will draw an arc on the side as I did before. Push-pull that. Grab the eraser tool. I don't want to push-pull this bottom one because it'll make it go away. That's no good. Eraser tool, and just get rid of these extra geometries. Now I will grab that surface. Incidentally, a surface is multiple faces at different angles. If I turn on my hidden geometry, these are faces. My hidden geometry turned on allows me to select those faces independently. With my hidden geometry turned off, this surface is a smooth series of faces. That being said, let me move this very precisely to that point right there. And there we go. Now all pieces are kind of folded like a real trifold would be if it was whatever, sitting in your pocket. I know I use that reference a lot, but it is a little bit extreme. So here's a quick fix. If you select those 3 components, grab the scale tool, and I'll just flatten those out a little bit. But notice this one is not changing now because I'm not editing the contents of the component, I'm scaling the component. And to show you another example, I will scale just this one on the end an extreme amount, and only it is changing. You would not want to do that, so let's undo. But it makes this one look just ever so slightly a little bit better. And you know, at this point, let me put a little bit of a table on here. And I'm going to load up a wood texture for some reason. I think these owls look kind of nice on a chopping block type table. And I'm going to move this whole thing vertically just so when I turn my shadows on, the ground plane doesn't visually disrupt what I want to be seeing here. The other reason I wanted to make this plane here is to show you subtle things like this. Notice how that's kind of floating up on the edge. It doesn't need to be absolutely perfect, but I like to come in here and just rotate. Oops, like that's too far when it starts disappearing into the, that was maybe a bit far right there, but just enough so it doesn't look too fake. Do the same thing over here. All right, and I'm going to make a copy of this. Maybe this one is standing up. So, you know, you can take paper and whoops, something got incorrectly applied there. I accidentally selected my protractor tool instead of my rotate. That draws a construction geometry. My bad. Let's select that face, rotate. And there we go. So that one is sitting up. I'm going to make a copy over here. And this time I want this thing to be a little bit flatter. Actually quite a lot flatter. So let's just make it as flat as I can without geometry starting to overlap themselves. That looks all right. And you know what? These guys I'm going to make a group. So I'll right click and make a group. Group just doesn't know itself. If I make a copy of these, they're all separate. If it was a component and I made a copy, they would all know each other and reflect each other's changes. I made this a group simply because I want to quickly access these rotation handles, which are accessible when you have the move tool, not the rotation tool. So let's go ahead and lock that in the blue direction and put this on my tabletop. And that might be even, you know, I'm going to scale this again just because that's a little kind of thick. Okay, at this point, I'll go through and do some really quick moves here, move copies, moving it in the blue direction. It's always easier to move things in two directions when you're working in 3D space. So I will move this, and I can even type in exact amount. So I'll just arbitrarily click this, and I'm going to try like 0.1, enter. That's a pretty good guess there. 0.2, enter. And notice it's placing it at subtle heights. I'll make a little bit of a copy. Then I'll make another copy this way, or a rotation, not a copy. 0.2 again, that seemed like a pretty good amount. And a little bit of a rotation. And maybe there's one over here that's even sitting at like a little bit of an angle. Well, that was a pretty good guess. And these rotation handles come in handy when you're just ever so slightly tweaking it. And you know what? That can overlap a tiny bit. It's not the end of the world. Or maybe it is. I don't know. But the idea here is just to kind of give a, you know, a little bit of a representation. Let me make this a group, and I use my shortcut keys to do that. Make a copy. I tend to use my shortcut keys more often as these videos progress. Now this one, because it's its own thing, it's not a component, I can edit it and rotate this front panel. Oh, but like that. And let's move that over a little bit more. Whoops, I did not mean to move it that far. So that looks pretty good. I can edit my tabletop to make it a little bit more fitting. Here we go. I could, and I've actually done things like this. I could have this in front of a group of people, and we can talk about what changes we want to make. We can use SketchUp's fun annotation tools to make notes, like put a new graphic here, etc. Speaking of changes, I'll get to that in just a moment, but I want to show you one more time, even if you never leave SketchUp, maybe this is a one-way street and you've just imported and followed along as I have done. If you turn off your profiles and turn off your edges and turn off your axes, this is not a terrible looking model. I'll turn on my shadows. You know, I would buy that as a, you know, okay render. It's not the best render, but it's sure not bad. You want a better render? There are tons of renderers out there. I have Shaderlight installed. You can use one called LightUp or Thea Render or Podium, or there's a new one called Visualizer or V-Ray. There's blogs written about the different rendering tools out there. Just if you don't have a favorite one, Google it and the word SketchUp and you'll find some interesting things. So let's go ahead and let's see what my settings are here. This will be just a really quick low resolution render. Let's see how it looks. This opens up Shaderlight, and again, a very low resolution render, but you can start seeing how flexible and useful this is. This will even do animations, and I can change the lighting and the color, the intensity, the materials. I can go in and give this a glossy texture instead of the matte that it's at now. And then I can export this, and then I can take it into other applications such as Illustrator. So let's back up. Let's say in parallel, you maybe need to work on the graphics of this, or you've got someone else working on the graphics. And remember this, we got our Photoshop file that contains the smart objects. Well, let's just say we need to do a really quick edit, like, say, add a photo of a cat. Why not? And hey, there we go. Now I'm in a hurry, so I'm just going to cheat and do a screenshot. And I'll come over here and paste this into place. There it is. And let me do a really quick mask of that layer. And now I'll just position it into place. Let's put that one over here. And I will save this file. Okay, if I go back to SketchUp, why is this not updating? Well, remember, I didn't edit it from SketchUp. I edited the original, and I want to swap it out in SketchUp. This is the only way to do this as of now, where you can keep your non-destructed Photoshop file, which is here, which connects to the non-destructed Illustrator files via the smart objects. This is the process you want to do. I saved this to the desktop, which is master.psd. Well, back in SketchUp, here is what you want to do. Navigate to that material in your material browser. Hit Edit. On Windows, you have to hit the Edit tab. On Mac, if you click this drop-down button here, there is an option to load. Windows, it looks a little different, but I think it's a little bit more straightforward. Load essentially means reload, and I'll just navigate to that saved file, hit open, and hit close. And watch what happens. There we go. I've got my exciting cat picture. And did it update everywhere? I think it did. Yep, it updated on the backside as well. So kind of neat. Everywhere I've changed this. Do you know where else it updated? In my rendering application that's constantly rendering in the background here as I zip around, which I'm sure is doing wonders on my processor. So I'm going to go ahead and close that application. All right, well, you might say Photoshop is not the best place to be doing that kind of, because that's a low resolution cat picture. You should really be doing it in Illustrator, which I agree. So what do? Well, I've got my smart object linked master Photoshop file. I can double click on that smart object, and it now opens up the Illustrator document. And I can make those changes here. So text, how about that? Let's change this text to really exciting. And I will save this file, which automatically updates my Photoshop file. I will save the Photoshop file, which updates the master.psd on my desktop, and I quickly need to edit that image and reload that saved master file, and it will update in SketchUp. It's like file inception. Pretty neat. And the neat thing is, this can be done in parallel. You can have one person working on graphics, another person working about what it looks like in this presentation. Let me go ahead and edit the other one. Here it is, that front face. I will double click, and I'm going to place an exported graphic from before, speaking of file inception, here is an exported version of a previous model that I was working on. And maybe I want the graphic to be a part of the graphic. So it's not only using SketchUp to represent something, it's using SketchUp to create graphics to be used on other things, which are in turn used back to be represented in SketchUp. And it gets confusing if you think too hard about it. So I've saved this. Let's change the name to use making brochures in SketchUp. And I gotta tweak that a little bit. Let's make that more legible. And center it. This is great because this is non-destructive vector-based editing. I can edit these vector shapes. Maybe I want to make this a thumbs down. I don't want to do a thumbs down because this is a thumbs up. And I'll save this file. It updates in Photoshop. I will save that using the shortcut keys to do so. I will bring up my material browser, edit, and texture, load, navigate to that one. This brings in a new copy, and now it has updated my files. I see I've offset unintentionally that graphic a little bit. So easy fix, come back to Photoshop. I'll just drag that back up, file save. Notice there's a little bit of a white edge. Hey, that's an easy fix. I'll just draw a big old rectangle back there, do a fill. Now it's no longer there. Now it is there, but it's kind of not as noticeable. Save, Photoshop, to SketchUp, edit, load, and you can see how easy this is. There we go, problem fixed. That is all I really want to show. Again, at this point, you can export this to a renderer. You can use something like Shaderlight, which is a fairly reasonably priced and fun rendering application. Some people really dive headfirst into rendering, and you would not believe, or maybe you would, how many settings there are to get your lighting just right. There's all kinds of settings of how material absorbs and reflects and bounces, and then I haven't even talked about lights yet. That's a topic for a whole nother series of videos. I've shown you everything I'd like to show you. I hope you find it helpful. If you have any questions, as always, ask me in the comment section or just track me down. I'm pretty easy to find. Thanks for watching.